So when I think about creation care from, well, first of all, when you call it creation care, you're already talking about something that's spiritual. When I think about spirituality, I think about connectivity and how things are connected, and I think about our relationships. So I'm trained, like you said, in Christian ecological ethics. There's only 4 of us in the world that have this particular degree that I took. And I think of that connectivity and how our relationships matter, not just on the personal level, which is very, very important, but also how that extends to the rest of creation.
Okay, so let's go a bit deeper here.
Sure.
Because when I was in your office, I had my laptop, I'm asking you questions, and you were just going. And I'm typing as hard as I can type, and then I stopped for a moment, because I stopped using the word like creation care, and I used the word stewardship of creation, and you gently stopped me, you corrected me, and maybe unpack that for us a bit this morning, because that's usually a word that we use in Christian circles, right? To steward the earth, to steward our resources. Why might that not be the best term in understanding how we work in this world?
Sure. Well, I think that can be a good term, and I wouldn't, because this is such an important issue, I wouldn't push people necessarily away from that. But we've thought a lot about in my field, we've thought a lot about that term, and we've thought about the way that it actually creates a hierarchy, and perhaps a harmful hierarchy. So one of the big critiques from the outside, if you talk to sort of secular environmental activists, is they'll say Christianity really encourages this use and abuse of creation. Use of creation is very important. That's how we fulfill our needs, from financial stewardship to our nutrition needs, etc. But the thing that you have to think about is maybe what's helpful about talking about creation care is that it gets us to think about how, like I said, our relationships extend within this reality of connectivity. And it's more of a flat, less hierarchical connectivity. And then that's how you can have respect, you can have relationships, you can have sort of dialogue and mutually beneficial relationships, which I think is really important. So maybe stewardship takes away a little bit of that because it's so hierarchical. Yeah, so in terms of like a small s sacrament, all of creation is a sacrament. We just talked about that. If it's God's creation, that you need to respect it. I've always been taught that one of the reasons that we should respect our fellow people is because the Holy Spirit is especially alive in them. To think that just stops with human people is kind of arrogant in some ways, right? And I think you need all of creation to sort of understand God. Human interaction is incredibly important, but you also need this extra element. Otherwise, God would have made everything just humans. So a lot of people, I have my family's from Alberta. They're from rural Alberta, where it's the oil patch. That's where they grow up. But you can still find ways to connect with the land and the people that bring you towards this ethic of creation care.
So when we were talking about this past summer, you went even so far to say that when it comes to politics, this isn't even a left or right issue.
Oh yeah, I think this is the real major thing, is that unfortunately the way that it's divided in the US and maybe by extension into Canada is it's viewed as a left and right issue, but we all need creation. You need creation to take your next breath. So it shouldn't be a left and right issue. It should be beyond politics, I think.
So then expand my mind, because you kind of blew my mind a little bit when we met, because you said this line, and I wrote it down, so I'm going to say it exactly like you said it. I think this is what you said, at least. You said that one can be a good card-carrying creation care Christian and be a climate change denier. How is that possible? Because in my mind, it's like one or the other. How does that work? You did say that, right?
Well, I don't know if I would have said climate change denier, but yeah, maybe I did. But the basic point is there, right? Is that because there's so many entry points to this, there's so many ways that you can connect with land and people and animals, etc. That this climate change issue isn't necessarily the key piece of the puzzle, and I do think people put too many marbles in that basket. So
what is the core of the issue? If you can boil that down, if it's not climate change, then what are we actually talking about?
Well, I would challenge people, right, on this issue to think of how much of their relationship with God is just one-dimensional, looking upwards and missing what's around you. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is to think, we know this in our interpersonal relationships. The challenge is to think of how my faith in God can be expressed in the world, be expressed in my family, in my workplace, etc. When you start thinking along those lines, you have to say that those duties to God, your relationship with God, it has implications for how you relate, not just to people in your family, not just to the workplace, but how you relate to the rest of the created world. And that should be your entry point, is finding ways where you can live out your relationship with God authentically within a created world. I really admire the way that heritage of like reusing things, of being thrifty, of thinking what really matters, of having a little bit of reflection before you just go and spend. My grandma would never let us leave the table if there was like a kernel of corn left on our plate. We know that like intuitively that you shouldn't waste. It's part of the prairie ethic. When you look at it, ethics that wastes food, it's also an ethics that wastes people, it's also an ethics that wastes the rest of creation. And I think you really have to be attentive to those things. So that can start on that very personal level of not taking more than you need. But that extends in so many different practical ways. And I just encourage people to sort of find their own path in all of that. And I think we lost something. We're starting to realize that we lost something in that interchange, and that the people that are from this place should have something to also teach settlers, and that dialogue is absolutely crucial and important. And that's respect for the natural world, that's respect for diversity in the natural world, but that's also respect for diversity amongst people, and that not everyone has to be the same, and that we can find ways to care for creation, maybe even with different motivations. So this is, like all of these things, and maybe related to what we were just talking about, this is an opportunity for us. What do we do with our powers of reflection, our powers of abstraction, etc.? How do we use those gifts in a way that helps complement creation, that helps even participate, from a Christian perspective, participate in the new creation, participate in the perfection of creation, rather than taking those abilities and using them in a way that harms our relationships with God, with our neighbor, or with the rest of creation.
I think that's a great point. I want to move it to like a more of like a hopeful place. But like you said, a tree is going to be a tree. A tree knows what it's supposed to do, and it's going to do it. It's like we're the only ones who we want to be what we're not, right?
Yeah.
So then, what brings you hope when you see like the larger picture?
Yeah.
What part does the church play, the local church play, in creation care?
So this is something that actually is incredibly compelling to me, is that there's people who are inspired by faith. In our case, we're talking about people who are inspired by Christian faith, who are doing this work of participating in God's good world. And that to me is incredibly hopeful. And that to me is an energy that's transformative, that's necessary. And I have students who are mostly moved by Christian traditions and live simply, live in good relationships, struggling to find different ways of being in the world that isn't just this abusive way towards other people and towards creation. So I see the hope in those people. Okay. Yeah.